social workers who has a decision maker, and the decision will be moderated by Khalid Al-Amri.
Before I get started, I just want to say a couple of words. Before I ever do these sessions, I usually call my wife really quickly to just say a little prayer for me, that I'll say the words that I need to be said, and I'll be able to connect. So I want to thank her and tell her I love her. Second thing, she asked me how I was doing. And I said, I'm absolutely exhausted. I am tired. I am drained, but I'm happy and I'm energetic. And part of that, and my hat goes off to Her Excellency Mona Al-Marri and the team for absolutely inspiring me and doing an amazing job and bringing passion and energy to life. So thank you so much. When I was in my very last class at Stanford, I took a class called Strategic Philanthropy with Laura Arriaga Andreessen. And she has a quote that she would bring to class saying, philanthropy, or that money used for philanthropy, is society's risk capital. So it's on philanthropists, philanthropic leaders, social entrepreneurs to innovate, to bring innovation to that force. And when you think about innovation, especially in terms of philanthropy, you're not only thinking about creating new things, but also creating new ways of thinking to solving old problems. Now, I'm excited to engage the panel today on how they're bringing innovation to the philanthropic sector, but I'm more excited to hear from you all. I look forward to hearing all your thoughts and challenging them, because my opening question is going to bring that to life. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, His Excellency Tariq Al-Gurg, CEO of Dubai Cares. Dr. Hong Sheng Choing, founder and CEO of Optimal Docs. Dr. Manal Imran Teriyam, CEO, Noor Dubai Foundation. Monique Villa, CEO, Thomson Reuters Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. So I've got a challenge for you all. A Harvard professor, Michael Porter, said that billions of dollars are wasted in philanthropy. He said the way philanthropic companies are run, or organizations are run, are years behind traditional businesses. Now, I'm not going to direct this question to anyone. I'm going to throw it out there. Whoever's brave enough to take the challenge and respond to him, please do. Your Excellency.
He's right, to an extent, until Dubai Cares was founded back in 2007. And I say this because when we started in 2007, the team was young. And when I say young, I mean we had fresh graduates from the university, and we had people working in the workforce for about 2 or 3 years. So we didn't have that experience. And how we started, and my team keeps on telling me, don't say this in public, but I will say it. We started as a check writer. We went to a UN agency to see what they do. And if they tell us we're doing X, Y, Z in a country, and the program would be for $20 million, we would write them a check of $10 million, and so on with international NGOs, the same story. But this lasted only 2 years, until we started learning from these UN agencies and international NGOs, because those are the implementing partners of Dubai Cares. And then we started sitting with our implementing partners, learning from them. So that was the next 2 years, learning from our partners on how things are happening. And then the third set of the 2 years, we started designing programs alongside with our partners. And today, for the past year and a half, we design our own programs. Of course, we consult with the governments that we go into, the recipient countries. We also consult our implementing partners. We sit as a consortium, try to solve the problem. Many don't know because we don't announce this. We invest a lot of money, millions of dollars, into research in education, for global education. And the findings that we get from this research, we know what works, what doesn't work. We would know how to innovate new programs. And Dubai Cares is always about changing the paradigm when it comes to education, and we have done that a lot. And we have successful stories. So I do agree with him. I do agree with him. A lot of philanthropists or philanthropies, maybe they were check writers, maybe they had a reporting system, but maybe they were not innovative enough, probably. But I feel after the financial crisis, the donors of the world became smart donors because they wanted to know where the money is going. So I think until the financial crisis, let's say, yes, probably. But after the financial crisis, I think things have changed and things will change to the better.
Okay. So do we have smart donors now? Anyone want to comment?
Yeah, I could comment,
okay, please.
if I may. I think Michael Porter is quite right. When you think that every year more than, I don't know how many trillions of dollars are given as aid to people around the world, and how much arrives effectively at the end, that is to say at the front line, the ones who really need it, the most poor in the world, you would be amazed of how much waste there is in between. And unfortunately, this is improving. Metrics are improving, everything is improving, but there is still a lot of waste. And a lot of organizations who spend a lot of money on themselves rather than on the person that should receive it. When I took over the Thomson Reuters Foundation, I was the managing director of the Reuters news agency. And I was before that a journalist and working for Agence France Presse also, so I have quite a few experiences. But when I took the charity, I had no idea how a charity was run, but I knew how to run a business. I was running a business in Reuters. And I was pretty shocked by what I saw at the beginning, because Reuters was doing essentially training of journalists, but we were also giving grants at the time, Reuters Foundation, when a disaster would happen. So when I took over in 2008, a disaster happened. It was the earthquake in China. We gave funding, very small grants, to a few charitable organizations. And then the metrics to follow up on what happened with the money we gave, etc., we are not there. Yep. And I discovered that, among other things, we were helping to buy blankets for people there. And I was thinking, why on earth Thomson Reuters, who knows a lot about news, about information, about database, about connection, would give blankets? It makes no sense. So I built the Thomson Reuters Foundation on very strict ways, which were essentially to use what we are good at, to use our skills. So we have programs now that are all services. We don't give grants any longer, we give services, and our impact has been multiplied by a very big time. So for instance, we have 4 programs, and one is still training of journalists around the world, because it's extremely important in my view. It helps democracy, it helps shedding light on issues, it helps a fair discussion. the highest principles in journalism, help people to understand issues, etc. So we cover, we train journalists. We also cover, and we have a team of journalists at the foundation to cover underreported issues. And when I speak of underreported issues, it's the ones that are not mainstream media, or the ones that typically Reuters will not cover because it is humanitarian issues, it is human rights and women's rights, human impact of climate change, or human trafficking and slavery. We shed light on these issues, and as we are distributed by Reuters Wise, our impact is big because we have an audience of 1 billion people a day. The third program we created, and it's the most impactful, is Trust Law. And Trust Law has become the biggest marketplace for pro bono in the world. The idea came, you know, as very often in life, meeting people, listening to people. And someone in Washington, D.C., a lawyer, told me he created the Pro Bono Institute in Washington on the basis that the law firms that would be member would give minimum the equivalent of 2.5% of their revenue each year into free hours of their lawyers for people who could not afford a lawyer. When you know the turnover of the big American firms, it's a lot of money, 2.5%. So I was very surprised, asked, is it the same around the world? He said, no, not at all. And so we created Trust Law to spread the practice of pro bono in the world. And today we have more than 3,000 members. In 5 years, the law firm told us that they spent for our beneficiaries, which are social entrepreneurs and NGOs in 175 countries, and we choose the best ones, of course, and the ones which have the biggest impact. They have spent more than $70 million for them through Trust Law, which means that we have multiplied our impact. I have a very small foundation. I could never, I mean, the budget that Thomson Reuters give me every year is $6 million. So we act really as a multiplier, thanks to the goodwill of the law firms all around the world, etc. So you can do things with your skills, with your knowledge, with your know-how, that are much better than just signing grants. And to come back to Michael Porter, unfortunately, not all organizations are run in a business manner, in a business way. And I think it's a pity. And the more it becomes that, and the better we'll be as a society, and the more social progress we will see around the world.
Thank you. Dr. Manan, I want to ask you something. But before I ask you the question, I heard that you were actually a volunteer CEO, that you don't get paid to be a CEO. Is that true?
Yes.
Wow.
Well, it's not about getting paid or not getting paid. It's about your contribution to the cause. Now, going back to Mr. Potter's remark, I would like to act because Tariq here said donors are becoming smarter, and we have smart donors, but we also have smart philanthropy.
Yeah.
Philanthropy went through a lot of crises, not just the financial crisis, especially when you look at what's happening around us in our region, a lot of conflict, a lot of politics. So it's becoming very difficult, or more difficult, to run a philanthropy than to run a business. Because there's always a misconception about some philanthropic activities coming out from the Middle East. But I think the key here to say whether he was right or wrong is to look at his experience with philanthropy, first of all, because he might have had an unfortunate experience, but also to look at philanthropy in a way that, is it smart, fulfilling the objectives, or is it just doing some humanitarian work scattered here and there? So that I think will answer whether he was right or wrong.
I wanted to ask you since you were with the foundation since day one. How have you used innovation to grow over the course of time? As a CEO, how do you ensure that innovation is always a key part of the strategy with whatever it is that you're doing?
Well, when Noor Dubai first started, it started in 2008 as an initiative from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. We are very blessed in Dubai that His Highness thinks of a humanitarian initiative on an annual basis, and nowadays we're seeing more than one being launched per year. So it's more of the culture. He made it part of the culture of the UAE to have those humanitarian initiatives. In 2008, we were required to help around 1 million people who are suffering from visual impairment around the world with a certain budget. But then with proper planning and partnership is key here. We partnered with other NGOs who have history in preventing blindness. So we managed to reach out to 5 million, that's 5 times the number that was required, and half of the budget. So that was enough to convince His Highness that investing in the philanthropy, especially in preventing blindness, is a very good cause financially, and it has a great impact. When we talk about prevention of blindness, we're not talking about making a blind person see again. We're talking about enabling a whole community, because the burden of having someone who's visually impaired within a community is massive, especially in countries that are in need. A blind mother needs one of her children to stay with her at home to take care of her. A blind student needs to drop out of school, and maybe his brother needs to drop out of school to stay with him and take care of him. And it was actually creating a financial burden on the family and on the village that they live in. So our work is preventing blindness, treating existing blindness, and developing programs for the future. Training, education, and when I say education and training, I don't mean just the people who are visually impaired, but people who work on preventing blindness as well. So that's in a simplified way what Noor Dubai does.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Hong, I wanted to ask you, in your profile, you've just been nominated for Innovator of the Year in 2016. You know, and on a panel of innovation, I'm interested in what's the formula? I mean, how does your mind work in terms of a process of being innovative every day and getting to sort of those heights?
I guess to answer that question, I start off with exactly what innovations that we've created. We're working on an organization known as Ophthalmic Docs. In short, we call it ODocs. And essentially what we're dealing here is that our mission is the same as Dr. Manal's, trying to end the prevalence of blindness around the world. As we all know that 80%, more than 80% of the blindness around the world are preventable if we treat it or picked it up early enough. So our innovation came about dealing with real-life problem. We basically take a step backwards. There's too many things going on around the world. There's too many, rocket sciences, people sending people to Mars. But there's this real problem which exists in a modern world when there's treatment easily available for everything else. But why is it still a problem where 39 million people are still blind, 285 million people around the world are still suffering from visual impairments? So we take a step backwards and say, right, can we just look at the basic problems? Just looking at the basic issues, which is, facing every single people who have been, having all this problem of access to care and lack of equipment or lack of funding. So, but looking at those simple questions, that's how we basically approach those issues. When I step in, as a junior eye doctor, I could potentially do, more hours, seeing more patients, treating, potentially 5 more patients a day. But how many more years before, I have to do that, before I can get up to 1 million patients? Impossible by myself. I could get 10 more of us, 100 more of us, but stepping one step backwards, I had to look at it. Overall, look at the issues. One of the major issues is trying to pick up preventable blindness at the first step. Who has the conditions, who doesn't have it? And if you look at the pattern of referrals coming into the eye clinic, majority of those patients come through primary care providers, that's general practitioners. And GPs, they have 80%, we've done a survey that 80% of general practitioners, family doctors, they are not confident in treating eye conditions. So the reason is because they just can't see what's going on in the back of the eye. They've got a simple ophthalmoscope, but that device was just invented 150 years ago. It hasn't really evolved or changed, but it sits in every clinic. So what's the purpose of an equipment sits in a clinic, which majority of the doctors doesn't even know how to use it, or doesn't have the confidence or training enough to use it. So that's when we say, right, can we change just this one single thing, one step at a time? And what we've done is we've converted the smartphones, mobile phones, and harvest the power of mobile technology to create a set of equipment which allows doctors to use it to diagnose eye care, and to provide eye care, sorry, to diagnose eye diseases. And it allows them to do everything, including checking the vision and taking a photo of the front of the eye and the retina as well, with a very simple method. And you asked me about what's the formula behind. Honestly, there's no true formula behind anything. Is pretty much finding the passion. If you find the work that you like, you're passionate in it, you wouldn't sleep. You wake up first thing in the morning, you would try to get it done. It's not like going to a normal 9 to 5 work kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like if you have a passion for golf, you find time for golf.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Your Excellency, I had a question on, I think Dubai Cares focuses a lot on education. So how do you innovate, not in the way that you run as just a philanthropic organization, but is there much innovation going on the ground about how you deliver that education to communities?
Do you want me to put it into the context of the woman and the girl child?
Please do, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure, but it's going to take a bit longer than
We have time, it's
sure.
still green.
Look, at Dubai Cares, we, as I mentioned, we have innovative models. We have changed paradigm. His Highness, when he established Dubai Cares, he was very clear on having innovative models to make change, to have impact, to have sustainable education to these nations and to the children. And for the past 2 days, we've been talking and we've been listening about women empowerment and gender equality in the job market. And how we see it, it's very simple. It's true that the leadership has to have commitment. They have to believe in it. In terms of gender equality, they would pass government policies, HR policies would change. That is a must. It has to start that way. But we should not forget that the biggest chunk of the solution starts at the school. We have to have gender equality within the early childhood education years. So that's the KG1s and the KG2s, and the primary education levels. If you have girls and boys balanced, the equation is balanced, the ratio is 50-50 almost, from the schooling days, from the primary level, and imagine how much of those will graduate, and how much of those graduates would be to the market in order for them to recruit. It will be a balanced equation. But if you have an 80-20 ratio, where boys, or the other way around, girls, the recruitment process will be targeting on a dominant gender.
Yep.
So starting from school is very important, because it takes a generation or two to practice this and to change the mindset.
Sure.
So I would still go back that education has to, gender equality has to start from the early years of schooling. Now, how we did that into practice, how do we put it? I'll give you a very good example on what we do and on a girls' education program. Of course, Dubai Cares, we provide education to children in developing countries in terms of infrastructure. We provide them with water, sanitation, and hygiene. We do school feeding. We provide them with health in schools. That is to increase access, meaning enrollment rates in schools to these nations. And on the other side of the coin, we focus on quality. These children cannot just go to school and not learn. That's the biggest case in the world. We have around 250 million children who attend school, but they're not learning. So to have better learning outcomes, we do teacher training, early childhood development programs. We do literacy, numeracy programs, besides the principal and the teacher training and curriculum development to these nations. Now what we did, I'll give you one example on the girl child now. Philippines. When I signed for the Philippines program, I saw it on paper and I told the team, we're going to do something really big in this country. We're going to change a huge thing. And what happened around a year or a year and a half after that, I wanted to go and visit the program. So we went to the most rural areas of Philippines. And the issue in Philippines with the girl child is they have three main issues. They have early marriages, they have early pregnancies, and girls, as soon as they finish the primary level, they're forced to leave the school and go into the job market. We're talking about factories, assembly lines, customer service arenas, those kind. So to tackle these issues, we had to come up with innovative models. And one of the main innovative models that we did, and we even targeted the girls who have the personal reasons why they left school, such as early pregnancy. And when I say early pregnancy, I'm talking about 14 years of age. That's how early girls get pregnant in Philippines. We created an accelerated learning center in Philippines, where if a girl misses 3 years of schooling because of an issue, personal reason, she would be ashamed to go back to a lower grade, because the children will be 3 years younger than her, and she won't be able to get enrolled into the class that she's supposed to. So we have this accelerated learning centers where we give them 6 months of boosts until they reach their level of education. We created student clubs, spearheaded by boys, supporting and championing girls in the school, in the community, advocating for them. Her Excellency Reem Al-Hashmi, she mentioned yesterday that man has to support women. The woman cannot do it by herself. Yeah. And the former Prime Minister of Italy mentioned that the woman has to have her way up also. But we do exactly the same in schools, where we get the boys to support the girls, and that's the ground advocacy that we create in Philippines. And we also ensure
the boys and sometimes the girls to support the boys. Also.
Absolutely,
because girls are brilliant.
Absolutely.
At school
No, because Philippines has a main issue of girls' education. Yeah. That's why it had to be that the boys has to raise the flag and take the fort. And we also have, and to ensure that she finishes school, we have a lower secondary, we have higher secondary programs that will keep them into the schooling system. And it's very important to know that governments around the world, they have many priorities. To some governments, girls' education is not a priority. We have to know that they would have gaps, they would have funding gaps. And it is our jobs as civil societies and the international NGOs and the UN agencies to help these governments prioritize these agendas, put girls' education into the top of the agenda of the Ministry of Education. That is one. And then we would fill the gaps or the funding gaps. And once the program goes into 4 or 5 years and it's ready to go into scale because it becomes successful, then we would call the bilaterals to come and scale it up. So I'll go back and say gender equality starts from the schooling days, from the early childhood education level or the primary level.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So I want to move over to you, Dr. Manan, and you know, His Excellency mentioned about government priorities, and innovation is a top priority of the government of UAE. So you see a lot of organizations across the UAE incorporating an innovative spirit in their organization. So here's the thing. How do you know innovation's working in your organization? How do you sort of measure it and know when to pull the plug?
Well, there are many ways to measure the outcome of any project that you work with. For example, what Dr. Hong was mentioning, what we adapted within the primary healthcare in Dubai is telemedicine technology. And telemedicine was a solution because you've probably heard that the UAE suffers from very high prevalence of diabetes, and diabetes usually affects all parts of the body, including the eye, and can lead to visual impairment. So it was a challenge to provide enough physicians to cover the demand, which is the increasing number of diabetics in the United Arab Emirates. So we decided to introduce telemedicine, which created a one-stop shop for the clients, for the patients, where they only had to go and see the endocrinologist or the GP or the family physician, who was actually situated within their community health center, rather than seek medical attention from different specialties and start shopping around for healthcare. So the technology was provided as a network between all the endocrine primary care physician, or the diabetes clinics within primary healthcare, and the experts who are taking care of the eye health in one hospital. So measuring the outcome of such a program is very crucial, because you're actually looking at the well-being and healthcare of a full community. Mm-hmm. And in this case, in Dubai, we're talking about 14 different sites, catchment areas, as we call them in primary healthcare. So it's a large number of people who are enrolled into this innovative program. And it actually reduced the prevalence of getting blind. I cannot stop diabetes in one go from occurring in the population, but I can give a diabetic person a healthy, normal life. He can live with diabetes for the rest of his life without having to worry about a visual or any other disability. And it is through this technology, through this innovation, that I was able to reach out to as many people to screen and to detect it at an early stages as possible, so they will not have to go through the visual impairment. So that's one way, measuring the outcome, measuring the statistics, your numbers, and happiness index, people's satisfaction. How happy are they from providing them everything within one setup? So that was a very important measure or index to follow up as well.
Thank you, Mana. Monique, I wanted to ask you, as a CEO, you've got a lot of issues to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you have just leave like family and personal life aside, but showing up to the office every day, you have, manpower issues, budget issues, operational issues. How do you, as a CEO, ensure that, innovation comes up once a week, once a day, once a month? Like, how do you ensure it stays at the top of the list? Because you can imagine when you're operating a business, it's easy for that to sort of get deprioritized and manage any fires that you have to fight on the day.
I think the first thing you can do is to hire brilliant people. So, I mean, it's always striking to me how much choice you have when you hire someone. Always take the most brilliant one, because then you will look better, your company will work better, everything will be better. So that's the first rule: hire good people and brilliant people. Second, I mean, the foundation was in 28 when I took it, it was 10 people more or less. Today we are more than 100 staff and many contractors around the world, because it's truly global. And so you have always bugs of issues like HR, hiring people, etc., fundraising, because we need fundraising, etc., etc. But never lose from sight the startup mentality, and I really try hard to remain a startup, although we are growing all the time. So if someone has a brilliant idea in the team, I want to know it and I want to help it deliver. But this is the only way to reach bigger impact. And one of the things we do, and it's very much in line with this forum here in Dubai, is really empowering women and around the world, and especially the most the ones which are the poorest. And so we created a conference called Trust Women to put the rule of law behind women's rights. And so the mix of trust law and trust women together has been incredibly powerful, because through trust law we can look at the law. We were speaking of this fantastic innovation you have done for the eyes through a mobile phone. 2 years ago, the UN Foundation, who is a member of Trust Law, asked me if we could study what would be the regulation around the world for data, because in most of the rural area in the world, today you speak to your doctors through a mobile phone, no longer in person, because they are not there. So you speak to them and you transmit data to your doctor and vice versa. What happens with all that data? There is no regulation. So we put the issue on trust law, and we had 6 law firms, of the biggest law firms in the world, fighting to get this program because it was cutting edge, because it was, interesting, and they loved that. And they produced a very interesting report, and now the UN Foundation is pushing for regulation in that field, and we were just discussing that together, and that's very interesting. But others, like for more empowerment of women, a very good NGO in the Philippines called Visayan Forum was wanting to try to push the government to adopt a law on domestic workers in the Philippines, which are usually very, very poorly paid, and sometimes really at the limit of modern slavery. And so we put a report on trust law to research what would be the best law for the Philippines, comparing 12 countries, US, UK, Germany, France, etc., but also countries in Asia, etc. White and Case took the case. We published the research, gave it to Visayan Forum, and they went to do the advocacy, and the Magna Carta for domestic workers was voted 2 years ago in the Philippines, and it has changed the life of 2 million workers there. And again, I just arrived from India, and before that Hong Kong, and they were saying, the best law in Asia is in the Philippines. So you can have global impact through innovation, because in a way it's innovation to do this kind of research, etc. Another example, through Trust Women, it's a conference where we take action. So one day it's dedicated to women and economic empowerment, education, which is crucial, violence against women, etc. This year it will be on entrepreneurship. But the second day is always dedicated to human trafficking and modern day slavery, because 5 years ago when I created the conference, nobody was speaking of the issue, and we wanted to shed light on it. And we took a few actions which have been big. One, very quickly, because it's interesting how it works, and we come back to data. Someone from JP Morgan Chase, that we met by chance, one of my colleagues at the foundation met him in the train between Washington and New York. And he said, it's funny you do a conference on this, because one day looking at the credit card data of my clients, we noticed that a big chain of nail salon in New York, the manicure, all our clients at JP Morgan were paying between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. in the morning, and never less than $100. So we thought it was a bit suspicious, and we shared the data with law enforcement. They investigated and discovered that not only it was a network of prostitution, but it was also a network of human traffickers that they dismantle. So I said, look, you have to come at the conference and speak. We must convince the other banks to do the same, etc. Because human trafficking is a big business. It's a $150 billion business a year, according to the ILO. So he didn't want to speak at the conference because he said it's not very good advertising for JP Morgan Chase. Well, fine. But then we took the action together to convince the other American banks. And I said, if I invite all the general counsel of the big banks to come and see me, I think they will not show up. So I need someone really strong with me, a man. In that case. And he said, why don't you ask Cyrus Vance, who is the Manhattan District Attorney, the prosecutor for New York. So I went to see Cyrus, and I said, I want to do that. He said, fantastic. He co-hosted the working group with me, so all the banks showed up, of course. And then we designed the red flags to incorporate in their software, which they did with the best NGOs in the US on that. And since, the 6 biggest banks in the US are doing it, and when they see the red flags flashing, they share with law enforcement. And Cyrus Vance was back at the conference last year to say, since this is in place, the number of suspicious reports have doubled, and it allows me to prosecute people on data, and not only on the strength of the victim, because as we know, a victim that has been abused for years is not very strong. One last word. Last year, we launched at the conference in November something that we call the Stop Slavery Award. And it will be an award that we distribute from this year's it's a sculpture designed by Anish Kapoor, you know, the great artist, who works with me on that. And we will give it to the best-in-class corporation in their industry that really look at how to clean their supply chain from forced labor. You know, down the supply chain, subcontractors, you have cases of forced labor. And very few industries are not tainted by that. So in order to encourage the virtuous circle, we are going to give awards to the ones who cannot say, I'm slave-free, but say, I do the best I can, I'm the best in class. And then we will have a very high-level panel of judges to do that. So I would love that, you know, there are Dubai companies that could be a candidate for this award, and it would be great because it would start, you know, what I call the virtuous circle.
Thank you for sharing. I would like to open up to the audience for questions. If you could just raise your hand, let us know who the question is for, and please, I humbly request one question per person. So we have two over there. Are there mics going around? Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you. I'm going to address the question to the whole panel. Especially in this day and age, how do you decide who to give to, and how do you decide who's more worthy? Because there's so much going on in the world, and there's so many people suffering that it's really difficult as an organization to decide who to help. So I just wanted to ask all of the panelists how they decide who to help and where to go first.
Great question. Your Excellency, you nodded.
Yeah, good question. Look, to us, it's education. So education is built into the HDI, which is the Human Development Index of the UNDP. And we look at all the indicators and we take the lowest bit of the list, and we look at their education needs. Most of them most of those countries would fall in Africa and Asia, and not necessarily. If you were the poorest country in the world, you might have the worst education systems. Djibouti, for instance, lays at the bottom of the list, but they have a good education system. They solve the problem. We played a role into solving their problem also. But we look into that as one. There's the GMR, which is the Global Monitoring Report of UNESCO. We look into that report on how the devastation of education is in the world, and which country needs education the most. We speak to UN agencies, we speak to international NGOs. We just have a look to see where is the education problem in which kind of countries. That is one. And then I have a team at Dubai Cares who looks into the education problems in terms of our own way of doing research. So putting all of this together, we come to a consensus that yes, there are those countries, and we prioritize based on the need of education, based on the parity when it comes to gender, based on the access. If the access rate is too low, we will help those governments increase access. If the quality is low, we would increase it. So these are some of the parameters that we use at Dubai Cares when it comes to global education.
For us, I mean, it's a bit different because we don't give funding, but we give services, and big services. Because once you become a member of Trust Law, we take over all your legal issues. So it's a big thing for NGOs. And we try to vet the best NGOs. And the reason why at the beginning of Trust Law was because I discussed with all the law firms to know, what do you need from us? And they said, what do we need is to make sure that the people we help are not a cover for something dodgy or have no impact or whatever. So we do that extremely seriously, and there are many ways you can vet the good NGOs from the less impactful NGOs, looking at their board, looking at their results, looking at their finance, etc. So we do that to make an impartial judgment on them.
Well, to decide which country or which place do we take our programs to, or which program we deliver to which country, it's actually a lot of research. We have to look into the statistics, we have to look into the trend of blindness in certain countries. You might wonder, for example, like Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, we have two different programs, not just one. We've got the prevention program and the treatment program. And in other countries, we have just one. And the reason for that is because we actually study every country on its own, and then we even go into the country and we study every region within that country on its own. We look at the needs. Then a very important factor in deciding who gets the service is how much is that government willing to accept the service, because you cannot force your work upon someone. We cannot enter a country if we're not welcomed in it, simply because you need to gain their trust, you need to be certified in the field that you're working in, you need to go back again and do your the follow-ups, further on research. So it's like a collaborative work, and when we are doing our ICAMs, we always insist on working with what we call a local host, which is a similar organization to us. They could be different local hosts in different countries, we can change them, but they are the people who would go to the beneficiaries, people in need. They will go to them from house to house, identify them and bring them. Because again, there's the cultural aspect and there's the trust aspect as well. If I was a person in need and I was suffering from a disability, I would like to talk to someone who speaks my language, wears the same clothes I'm wearing and understands me. So that's why having the local support from the government, from local volunteers is extremely important. So that's how we identify areas of need and where do we go next.
Thank you, Doctor.
I guess to answer that, first of all, my organizations, we don't give any direct financial philanthropy donations. It's a bit radical of, you could say it's a radical thinking in some ways, the way we give, because giving is not just about giving cash or giving monies or supplies, but I do agree about, education as well. That's pretty important, giving out the educations and knowledge. And that's why in our organizations, what we do is we create equipments, but none of the equipments were patented or, in some ways, you say, protected by patents. We made it fully open source, is fully compatible with, what you want to do with it. If you like to get an entire set of equipments built behind your backyard, you could do it. You could build 100 units, distribute it to anyone around the, your local regions, and help those who need those equipments to deliver eye care. So that's what we believe. It's not in the form of trying to select who we're going to give those equipments to, but it is fully open to the entire world, so that everyone around the world could share the same knowledge, and all the information are published in journals and are easily available online as well. And that's why we do it.
Thank you. Next question, please. Do we have any hands from over here? Just so I'm not losing anyone.
Hi.
Okay, 1, 2. Please.
Hi. I just want to congratulate all of you for the wonderful impact that you've had regionally and globally. My name is Elisa Freja. I have a women's network called Womena. So we look at helping women invest their money into startups. So it's not necessarily philanthropy, but it's a high-risk, long-term, small investment that is about looking at entrepreneurs, helping entrepreneurs, mentoring entrepreneurs. And what we're seeing is more and more entrepreneurs have businesses with social impact in mind. So it's not just about business. But what is the panel in general? What is your opinion on maybe not helping NGOs and nonprofits, but also looking at businesses that are self-sustaining, that are for-profit, but with a large social impact?
Great question.
I mean, at the foundation, we have a lot of social enterprise and social entrepreneurs who are all for profit, and it has been a big discussion with law firms, indeed, because they were wondering if it was right to help social entrepreneurs who are for profit rather than non-for-profit. So we have both, but finally, a lot of law firms help also the for-profit, because as long as they reinvest the profit into the social good that they do. And you have more and more great social enterprise around the world, around green industry, around all kinds of industries. And every time you see government withdraw from a field because they are cutting their budget, etc., because after the crisis in 28, you see social enterprise taking the lead on the ground. And I think that people like you who can invest in them would be fantastic, even on social enterprise who are for profit.
My organization, you could labor as a social enterprise, to be honest. We were initially approached by legal advisors as well, talking about, how we could how could we position ourselves? Are we going to be a registered company? Are we going to be a charity? And we're actually none in both sense. We're kind of in the middle, where you're a profit, you're a company which generates profit, but part of the profit goes back into the actual research and development, and to provide the social impacts. And I believe that, essentially all businesses that exist nowadays, serve a purpose. It has to be a business that provides either a service or, something to solve a problem. And what happens is, if you have the mentality of going towards this direction, I think that's the right mentality. But one of the biggest challenge in terms of, trying to get position yourself as a social enterprise is, in this day and age, it's quite a blurred border. There's not really, a lot of countries don't have a formal process of saying that, right, this is for full profit, conventional capitalism, this is food charity, and this is a socket for social enterprises. So it is quite a challenge in the beginning if you were to coming out as saying, right, I'm going to position myself as a social enterprise, and how am I going to get the investments, or how am I going to get the seed funding? I think the first step is trying to change the way we think about businesses, and by changing that mentality, we could potentially move on and say, right, people started recognizing exactly what social enterprises are, and there's a legal recognition or a way to peer review what exactly do we do. And I think that's the first step that we should do.
Thank you. We had a question in the back there, and we'll take those last two, and then we'll wrap up. Please.
All right, my name is Yogani Bhatia. I represent an organization named Society of Exploration Geophysicists, an association management by profession. But my question to you is not as a professional, but as a mother of twins who are turning 10, who embarked on an absolutely fantastic journey 2 years ago to support workers with winter wear. A question for you all on the floor is, are your organizations or anybody like yours working out there to spot talents such as these? Because within themselves, they want to benefit humanity, and schools particularly are not trained well enough to take advantage of this particular capability and take them to the next level. So that is my question for you. Thank you.
As
I think it's for you.
As recruitment, or
As students, I think.
as a student?
Can you clarify the question, please? Is it about engaging students?
The young.
Engaging young students.
Engaging students, yeah. Tariq, Your Excellency, would you like to take that?
Well, I apologize, but our working model is we work towards sustainable development. We work with nations, with countries, with ministries of education to enhance the education system in that country, to make it sustainable, to scale it up. So we don't do any scholarships, or we don't help a school or a community for such a cause. We test models. We take risks into investing into that country because we believe that we can solve an education issue. So it's more into sustainable development rather than a humanitarian need. That is the mandate of the BioCares.
Thank you.
If I may add,
Please, Doctor.
I think if you're living in Dubai or in the UAE, you've heard of the launch of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Global Initiatives. Now, one of the aim of the Global Initiative is to bring NGOs from His Highness's initiatives together to do some work, and I'm really privileged to work with His Excellency Tariq Al-Girg on an initiative to promote volunteering in schools in the United Arab Emirates. So as you said,
It's a secret.
that's a secret. No, but it will answer her question. As you said, that schools here are not equipped to do that, but I think within a couple of months, once we start implementing this plan, you will see a huge change in schools within the United Arab Emirates.
Okay.
So I've been given the red light. We have time for one more question, unfortunately. Lady in the back.
Good afternoon. My name is Malika, and my question is addressed to everyone at the panel. We've heard over the last 2 days that to overcome gender inequality and empower women, education is at the core of that. So why is it that education today in established economies, in developed economy, is becoming more expensive and more inaccessible across the board.
Education becoming more expensive.
Well, it's very true. And there is little that organizations can do for that. But it is very true. One thing where gender equality is still not at all visible is the enormous pay gap that exists between men and women doing exactly the same job. The White House published for the US this astonishing data, which is that a woman makes 78 cents when a man does $1 in the US, for exactly the same job. So we are very far, and no use to say, I just come back from India, as I said, that the gender gap is still much bigger. And so this is a very big issue. But on education, which is more and more costly, unfortunately, there is very little that us as organizations we can do.
Well, it's not just education that's getting more expensive. As we develop more and introduce more innovative ways for dealing with normal things in life, you can see that also healthcare is becoming more expensive. But that's the beauty of having the innovation. Maybe Dr. Han can also elaborate on that. When we provide innovative solutions for certain problems, whether education or healthcare, or finding proper jobs, then we are making it easier for people to access those services. And in time, it's going to be less and less of a cost burden. So that's the beauty of having innovation within our work. It is to make our work more accessible and cheaper for people as well.
Yeah, totally agree with that. You know, with what we're seeing here nowadays, you know, it's not just about access to education, but access to, like, for example, if you talk about social enterprises, fundings, philanthropic donations, or, you know, crowdfunding, which is something, you know, is taken over the entire stage. Peer-to-peer sharing of services. I'm not sure if you heard of Uber, sharing taxis and things like that. I believe, you know, it is just a matter of time where an innovation is going to step in saying, right, you know, we're going to make education accessible and freely available. It's going to be just, you know, a matter of a platform coming out like that, and boom, you know, you've got to enroll in your masters or, you know, of business or something like that, which you could all do potentially virtually. And I think that's just, you know, it's potentially happening right now.
Final comment, Your Excellency.
I'm a 12-year-old banker, so I'm going to wear both hats and try to give you a good answer. Education in the developed world is becoming more expensive because the lifestyle and cost of living is going up. It has nothing to do with education. If you go to developing countries and the most poorest countries, they have better solutions for education, and the cost of education is actually dropping. So I don't think this is related to education per se, but I think it's about economies, and any nation which grows, cost of living would grow with it. I think that's the link if you put development and business together.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And with that, I'd like to thank our panel for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I humbly ask you all to just remain seated. We're just about to set up the stage for the closing sessions. Thank you.